What happens when life pushes you so far down that the only direction left is up? When everything you thought you knew about yourself crumbles in an instant, and the world labels you as broken, worthless, or beyond repair? This is the story of Marcus Chen, a 28-year-old software engineer who lost everything in one devastating week. His job, his fiancée, his home, and his faith in himself all gone. Standing at the edge of his darkest moment, he made a choice that most people called insane. He walked into a Navy SEAL recruitment office, not because he was brave, but because he had nothing left to lose. What happened next wasn't just about becoming a SEAL. It was about discovering that sometimes, when life pushes you off a cliff, you don't fall, you learn to fly. This is the true story of how the most elite warriors in the world showed one broken man that his greatest strength was hidden beneath his deepest pain. The SEALs have a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. But, for Marcus, yesterday was the hardest day of his life. Today was about to become something entirely different. Marcus Chen stared at the pink slip in his hands, the words blurring together through tears he refused to let fall. After 6 years at TechFlow Solutions, 6 years of 14-hour days and missed dinners, 6 years of believing his dedication meant something, he was being let go due to restructuring. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had helped design the very software system that had automated away his own position. The elevator ride down from the 32nd floor felt like falling through quicksand. Each floor that passed was another year of his life slipping away. He had started at TechFlow straight out of college, full of dreams and determination. He was going to change the world through technology, make his immigrant parents proud, build something meaningful. Instead, he was walking out with a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, a plant that was already dying, and a photo of him and Sarah from their vacation to Hawaii last year. Sarah. His chest tightened at the thought of telling her. They had been planning their wedding for 8 months, had put a deposit on a venue, had started talking about buying a house in the suburbs. She worked as a marketing director at a startup downtown, made good money, but they had built their future plans around his salary. The house they had been looking at, the honeymoon in Europe, the idea of starting a family in a couple of years, all of it suddenly felt like castles built on sand. The drive home to their apartment in Arlington felt longer than usual. Traffic crawled along the highway, and Marcus found himself staring at other drivers, wondering if any of them had just lost everything that mattered to them. A businessman in a BMW was shouting into his phone. A woman in a minivan was singing along to the radio. Life was continuing normally for everyone else while his world crumbled. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to their apartment, each step heavier than the last. The hallway smelled like Mrs. Rodriguez's cooking from 3B, a comforting scent that reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen. But, today, even that small pleasure felt hollow. He stood outside their door for a long moment, key in his hand, knowing that once he walked inside and told Sarah what had happened, everything would change. The apartment was quiet when he entered. Sarah's yoga mat was rolled up in the corner, her running shoes by the door. She was probably still at work, probably in some meeting planning a campaign for a client who actually valued her expertise. He set the cardboard box on the kitchen counter and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. From their 3rd-floor view, he could see the tops of trees lining the streets, the busy intersection below, the flow of people going about their lives with purpose. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "How was your day, babe? Can't wait to see you tonight. I have some exciting news." Exciting news. Marcus closed his eyes and leaned against the window frame. Whatever her news was, it would have to compete with his devastating update. He started to type a response several times but couldn't find the words. "What do you say? Hey honey, remember how we were planning our entire future together? Well, I just became unemployed, so we might want to put those plans on hold." Instead, he typed back, looking forward to hearing it. "I have some news too." The hours crawled by. Marcus tried to clean the apartment, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from spiraling. He organized their bookshelf, wiped down surfaces that were already clean, even attempted to fix the squeaky hinge on the bedroom door that had been bothering them for months. Nothing worked. The anxiety sat in his stomach like a stone, growing heavier with each minute that passed. At 6:30, he heard Sarah's key in the lock. Her cheerful voice called out, "I'm home. And I brought Chinese takeout from that place you love." She appeared in the doorway of the living room, holding white paper bags and smiling that radiant smile that had first caught his attention at a coffee shop 3 years ago. Her long black hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was wearing the blue dress he had bought her for her birthday. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, setting the food down on the coffee table. "Are you feeling okay?" Marcus sat down on the couch, and she settled beside him, tucking her legs underneath her in that way she always did. He could smell her perfume, something light and floral that he associated with safety and home. Soon, he might not be able to afford the apartment where these smells and memories lived. "You said you had exciting news," he said, postponing the inevitable. "Tell me yours first." Sarah's face lit up like a Christmas tree. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Remember how I applied for that position with the Morrison Agency in Los Angeles? The one I thought was a long shot?" Marcus nodded, though he had honestly forgotten. Sarah applied for new positions every few months, always looking for the next opportunity to advance her career. He had learned to be supportive without getting too invested, since most applications didn't lead anywhere. "They offered me the job," she said, practically bouncing on the cushions. "Not just any job, Marcus. Senior Creative Director. It's everything I've been working toward. The salary is almost double what I'm making now, and I'd be working with brands I've dreamed about my entire career." She was glowing with excitement, her hands moving animatedly as she spoke about the opportunity, the team she would lead, the campaigns she would create. Marcus felt his heart sinking even deeper. This was her dream job, the career opportunity she had been chasing for years. And it was 3,000 miles away from everything they had built together. "That's amazing," he managed to say, and he meant it. Sarah deserved this. She was brilliant at what she did, had always been more ambitious and focused than him. She was the kind of person who made things happen, who saw opportunities and seized them. "When would you start?" "That's the thing," she said, her expression becoming more serious. "They want me to start in 3 weeks. I know it's fast, and I know we'd need to figure out the logistics with your job and the wedding and everything, but, Marcus, this is my chance. This is what I've been working for. 3 weeks. Marcus looked at her beautiful, excited face and felt something breaking inside his chest. She was ready to start a new life, and he had just had his old life taken away from him. She was soaring toward her dreams while he was in free fall. "What's your news?" she asked, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "You said you had something to tell me too." Marcus looked down at their joined hands. Her engagement ring caught the light from the lamp beside the couch, the small diamond they had picked out together on a sunny Saturday morning 6 months ago. They had been so happy that day, planning their future over brunch, talking about the kind of house they wanted to buy, the trips they would take, the life they would build. "I got laid off today," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Sarah's hand tightened around his, and he could feel her whole body tense beside him. "What? How? I thought your company was doing well. You just got that promotion last year." Marcus explained about the automation, about the software he had helped create making his own position redundant, about the meeting with HR and the cardboard box and the elevator ride that felt like falling. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face cycling through expressions of shock, concern, and something else he couldn't quite identify. When he finished, they sat in silence for a long moment. The Chinese food was getting cold on the coffee table, but neither of them moved to open the containers. "This is actually perfect timing," Sarah said finally, and Marcus looked up at her in surprise. "I mean, not perfect that you lost your job, that's horrible. But perfect that it happened now, before I accepted the position. This could be a sign, Marcus. Maybe this is the universe telling us it's time for a fresh start." "You mean move to Los Angeles with you? Why not? You're brilliant with technology. There are tons of tech companies in LA. You could find something even better than what you had at TechFlow. We could get married on the beach, find a place in Santa Monica, start our life somewhere new and exciting." Marcus could hear the hope in her voice, could see her mind already working, already solving the problem, already planning their next chapter. It was one of the things he loved about her, her ability to see opportunity in crisis, to find the silver lining in any storm. But something about her enthusiasm felt wrong, felt like she was more excited about her career opportunity than concerned about what he was going through. "I don't know," he said. "I've lived here my whole life. My parents are here, my friends. And I just lost my job. I don't know if I'm ready to pick up and move across the country." He saw something flicker across Sarah's face, disappointment, maybe, or frustration. She pulled her hand away from his and stood up, walking to the window where he had been standing earlier. "Marcus, this is the biggest opportunity of my career. I can't turn it down because you're scared of change." The word scared hit him like a slap. Was that what she thought? That he was just afraid? "I'm not scared," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure they were true. "I'm processing. I lost my job today, Sarah. 6 years of my life just disappeared. I need some time to figure out what comes next." "Time we don't have," she said, turning back to face him. "They need an answer by the end of the week." The conversation that followed was the kind that changes everything, the kind where two people realize they're looking at the same situation from completely different planets. Sarah saw adventure and opportunity. Marcus saw loss and instability. She saw a chance to build something bigger and better. He saw everything familiar and comfortable slipping away. They tried to find middle ground, tried to compromise, but every solution felt like someone giving up something essential. Sarah could defer the start date by a few weeks, but not by months. Marcus could look for remote work, but most of his industry connections were local. They could maintain a long-distance relationship while he figured things out, but they both knew how that story usually ended. The fight, when it finally erupted, wasn't really about Los Angeles or his job or timing. It was about dreams that had grown in different directions without either of them noticing. It was about priorities that no longer aligned. It was about the discovery that love, no matter how real, doesn't always survive when two people need to go different ways to become who they're meant to be. "I need you to support me in this," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I need you to be excited for me, to be willing to take a risk on us." "I need you to understand what I'm going through," Marcus replied, his own voice breaking. "I need you to care more about what happened to me today than about your career opportunity." They were both right. They were both wrong. They were both in pain. Sarah took the job. She gave Marcus the ring back 2 days later, not out of anger but out of honesty. She loved him, she said, but she couldn't build her life around someone who wasn't ready to dream as big as she was. Marcus kept the ring, not because he was hoping she would change her mind, but because throwing it away felt like admitting that everything they had shared meant nothing. The next few weeks passed in a blur of job applications, rejection emails, and increasingly desperate attempts to find something, anything, that would pay the bills. His savings were enough to cover rent for 2 more months, maybe 3 if he lived on ramen noodles and stopped doing anything that cost money. His parents offered to help, but taking money from them felt like admitting complete failure. They had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing, had worked their entire lives to give him opportunities they never had. How could he tell them he had squandered everything they had sacrificed for? Friends tried to help, reaching out with job leads and offers to review his resume. But the tech industry was going through a rough patch, and there were a dozen qualified candidates for every position. His experience was solid but not extraordinary. His network was good but not exceptional. In a market where companies could afford to be picky, Marcus was just another laid-off programmer among thousands. The apartment felt bigger and emptier after Sarah left. Her absence was everywhere, in the missing coffee mug she had taken with her, in the empty space where her yoga mat used to be, in the silence where her laughter used to fill the rooms. Marcus found himself staying out later and later, going to coffee shops to work on applications, taking long walks through the city, anything to avoid coming home to the echo of his own footsteps. 3 weeks after the breakup, sitting in his Starbucks at 10 o'clock at night with his laptop battery dying and nowhere else to go, Marcus admitted to himself that his old life was over. The job wasn't coming back. Sarah wasn't coming back. The future they had planned wasn't coming back. He was 28 years old, single, unemployed, and running out of money in one of the most expensive cities in America. He closed his laptop and walked outside into the cool October air. The streets were quieter now, the business crowd replaced by young professionals heading home from late dinners and groups of friends bar hopping. Everyone seemed to know where they were going, seemed to have a place in the world. Marcus felt like a ghost, invisible and insubstantial, watching real life happen to other people. He found himself walking toward the Potomac River, drawn by something he couldn't name. The waterfront was mostly empty except for a few joggers and couples walking hand in hand. Marcus sat on a bench facing the water and tried to imagine what came next. He could move back in with his parents, take whatever job he could find, slowly rebuild his life one careful step at a time. It was the safe choice, the reasonable choice. But, sitting there in the darkness, watching the lights reflect on the water, Marcus realized he didn't want to be safe anymore. Being safe had gotten him laid off when the company needed to cut costs. Being safe had cost him the woman he loved when she needed someone willing to take risks. Being safe had left him alone on a bench at midnight, wondering if this was all his life would ever amount to. A couple walked past, the man in a navy dress uniform, the woman in a red dress that stood out against the dark night. They were laughing about something, completely absorbed in each other, but the uniform caught Marcus's attention. He watched them until they disappeared around a bend in the path, and something shifted in his chest. He had never considered the military. It had never even occurred to him as a possibility. He was a computer programmer, not a soldier. He played video games, not war games. The closest he had come to physical fitness in recent years was walking up the 3 flights to his apartment. But, sitting there in the darkness, he found himself thinking about structure, about purpose, about being part of something bigger than himself. The idea was ridiculous. He had no military experience, no physical conditioning, no understanding of what military life was actually like. He would probably wash out of basic training in the first week. But the idea wouldn't leave him alone as he walked home, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, as he ate breakfast the next morning while scrolling through job listings that all looked exactly the same. 3 days later, Marcus found himself standing outside a military recruitment office in downtown Arlington. He had looked up the different branches online, had spent hours reading about requirements and opportunities and career paths. The Navy had caught his attention, something about the combination of high-tech equipment and traditional values, about serving on ships that traveled the world, about being part of an institution that had been protecting the country for over 2 centuries. But it was a conversation with his neighbor, an older man named Jim who had served in the Marines decades earlier, that had brought him to this moment. "You thinking about enlisting?" Jim had asked when he saw Marcus reading military websites on his laptop in the courtyard of their apartment complex. "Maybe," Marcus had said, feeling foolish for even admitting it. Jim had studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Best thing I ever did was join the Corps. Gave me discipline, taught me what I was made of, showed me there was more to life than just getting by. You strike me as someone who needs to find out what he's really capable of." "I don't think I'm cut out for military life," Marcus had confessed. "I'm not exactly the warrior type." Jim had laughed. "Neither was I when I enlisted. Skinny kid from Ohio, afraid of my own shadow. But that's not what they're looking for, son. They're looking for people who want to become something more than they are. The question isn't whether you're ready now. The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes to get ready." Now, standing outside the recruitment office, Marcus felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. He could turn around, go home, keep sending out resumes and hoping for the best. It was the practical thing to do, the sensible thing. Or he could walk through that door and jump into something completely unknown, something that would either kill him or transform him. He thought about Sarah, probably settling into her new life in Los Angeles, building the career she had always dreamed of. He thought about his parents, who had taken their own leap of faith when they immigrated to America with nothing but hope and determination. He thought about the man he had been a month ago, comfortable, safe, and ultimately dispensable. Marcus took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the recruitment office. Behind the desk sat a petty officer in dress blues, clean-cut and professional, who looked up from his paperwork with a welcoming smile. "Good morning," the recruiter said. "How can I help you?" "I want to know about becoming a Navy SEAL," Marcus heard himself say, and even as the words left his mouth, he couldn't believe he was saying them. The recruiter leaned back in his chair and studied Marcus with new interest. "Tell me why." Marcus looked around the office, taking in the posters showing sailors serving around the world, the flags representing different naval traditions, the sense of purpose and belonging that seemed to emanate from every surface. He thought about his conversation with Jim, about the realization that he had never really tested himself, had never pushed beyond his comfort zone, had never discovered what he was truly capable of. "Because I want to find out who I really am," he said finally. "And I think I need to go through hell to do it." The recruiter's name was Petty Officer First Class Rodriguez, and he had the kind of calm, measured demeanor that came from years of dealing with young people who thought they wanted to be heroes. He listened to Marcus explain his situation without judgment, asking pointed questions about his education, his physical fitness, his motivations for wanting to join the Navy's most elite unit. "The SEALs aren't for everyone," Rodriguez said after Marcus finished his story. "Actually, they're not for most people. The selection process has something like an 80% failure rate, and that's just to get into the training program. The actual training has its own failure rate. We're talking about some of the most physically and mentally demanding challenges you can imagine." Marcus nodded, trying to look more confident than he felt. "I understand it's difficult." Rodriguez pulled out a thick folder and opened it on the desk between them. "Difficult doesn't begin to cover it. We're talking about men who are pushed beyond what most people think is humanly possible. Sleep deprivation, hypothermia, physical exhaustion that makes your muscles feel like they're on fire. And that's just the physical stuff. The mental challenges are what break most candidates." He showed Marcus photos of SEAL training, images of men carrying heavy boats over their heads, crawling through mud under barbed wire, sitting in freezing ocean water with their arms linked together. The faces in the photos showed a kind of determination that Marcus had never seen in his own mirror. "But here's what most people don't understand," Rodriguez continued. "The training isn't designed to find people who are already superhuman. It's designed to find people who refuse to quit when everything in their body and mind is telling them to give up. We're looking for a very specific type of mental toughness, and it's not something you can really predict until someone is actually going through it." Marcus studied the photos, trying to imagine himself in those situations. The man staring back at him from the images looked nothing like the software programmer who had been laid off 3 weeks ago. But maybe that was the point. "What's the process like?" Marcus asked. Rodriguez walked him through the steps: basic Navy boot camp, which was challenging but manageable for most people. Then, advanced individual training to learn a Navy rating. After that, if Marcus was accepted, he would attend Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School, followed by basic underwater demolition/SEAL training (BUD/S), the legendary program that had broken thousands of hopeful candidates over the decades. BUD/S is 24 weeks of hell, Rodriguez explained. First phase is 8 weeks of physical conditioning, culminating in Hell Week 5.5 days of continuous training on about 4 hours of total sleep. Second phase is 8 weeks of diving and underwater combat. Third phase is 8 weeks of land warfare and demolitions. If you make it through all that, you still have to complete SEAL qualification training, which is another 26 weeks. Marcus did the math in his head. Nearly a year of training, assuming he made it through every phase. A year of his life dedicated to finding out if he had what it took to join an elite brotherhood of warriors. "I need to be honest with you," Rodriguez said, leaning forward. "Most guys who walk in here talking about becoming SEALs are either adrenaline junkies looking for the ultimate thrill, or they're trying to prove something to someone else. Neither of those motivations tends to carry people through when things get really tough. The guys who make it are usually the ones who are trying to prove something to themselves." Marcus thought about that distinction. Was he trying to prove something to Sarah, who had left him for someone more ambitious? Was he trying to prove something to his parents, who had always been proud but quietly disappointed that he had chosen such a safe, comfortable path? Or was he trying to prove something to himself, that there was more to Marcus Chin than anyone, including Marcus, had ever suspected? "I think I'm trying to find out who I really am," Marcus said finally. "I've spent my whole life taking the safe route, doing what was expected, staying in my comfort zone. I want to know what I'm capable of when I can't quit." Rodriguez studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "That's a better answer than most. But wanting to find out and actually going through with it are two very different things. I've had guys with perfect physical fitness scores quit in the first week of BUD/S. I've had former college athletes ring the bell when they realized what they had signed up for. Mental toughness isn't something you can measure in an interview." The bell. Marcus had read about it online. During BUD/S training, there was a brass bell mounted outside the instructor's office. Any candidate could walk over and ring it 3 times, and their training would be over. No questions asked, no second chances. Ring the bell, and you went back to regular Navy life. Keep the bell silent, and you continued on the path toward becoming a SEAL. "But here's what I will tell you," Rodriguez continued. "The fact that you're here 3 weeks after losing your job, instead of 6 months from now when the shock has worn off, tells me something. You're not running away from your old life, you're running towards something new. That's the kind of motivation that sometimes survives when everything else falls apart." They spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, discussing the contract details, and scheduling Marcus for the physical and mental evaluations required for Navy enlistment. Rodriguez explained that even getting accepted into the Navy with a SEAL contract wasn't guaranteed. Marcus would need to score well on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, pass a demanding physical screening test, and convince a panel of instructors that he had the potential to complete the training. "Start running," Rodriguez advised as Marcus prepared to leave. "Not jogging, not casual exercise. Real running. The kind that hurts. You're going to need to be in the best shape of your life just to survive the first week, and you've got about 4 months to get there." Marcus walked out of the recruitment office feeling like he had just signed his life away. In a sense, he had. The contract he had signed committed him to 6 years of military service, with the understanding that if he failed SEAL training, he would serve out his time in whatever Navy role they assigned him. He could end up spending 6 years maintaining equipment on a supply ship, having never gotten closer to special operations than a recruiting poster. But, as he drove home through the Arlington streets that had become so familiar over the past 6 years, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since the morning he got laid off: a sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, he had a goal that meant something, a challenge that would test every part of who he thought he was. His parents' reaction was about what he expected. His mother cried and asked why he wanted to put himself in danger when he had so many other options. His father was quieter, but Marcus could see the concern in his eyes. They had fled Taiwan partly to escape the specter of military conflict, had built their lives around the idea that their son would have opportunities they never had, would be able to choose safety and prosperity over risk and uncertainty. "I don't understand," his mother said over dinner that night. "You have a good education, good skills. You could find another job in technology. Why do you want to become a soldier?" Marcus tried to explain about purpose and challenge and finding out what he was made of, but the words felt inadequate. How do you tell your parents that their dream of you living a safe, comfortable life had become your prison? How do you explain that their sacrifice to give you security had left you feeling like you had never really lived? "I need to do this," he said finally. "I need to know that I'm capable of more than just getting by." His father was quiet for a long time, then reached across the table and squeezed Marcus's hand. "When we came to America, everyone thought we were crazy. Give up everything for the unknown, they said. But sometimes you have to risk what you have to become who you're meant to be." The next 4 months became a crash course in discovering what his body was capable of. Marcus threw himself into physical training with the desperation of a man who knew his future depended on it. He started running at 5 in the morning, before the sun came up, pushing himself further each day until he could cover 10 miles without stopping. He joined a gym and began lifting weights, building muscle he had never needed as a programmer. More importantly, he began training his mind. He read everything he could find about BUD/S training, about the history of the SEALs, about the mental techniques that helped people push through extreme discomfort. He learned about visualization, about breaking large challenges into smaller, manageable pieces, about the difference between pain and injury. The physical transformation was dramatic. Marcus lost 20 pounds of soft flesh and gained 15 pounds of lean muscle. His hands developed calluses from pull-ups and rope climbing. His legs grew stronger from endless miles of running on increasingly difficult terrain. But the mental transformation was even more profound. Marcus began to understand that comfort was not the natural state of human existence. For most of his life, he had organized everything around avoiding discomfort, staying in jobs that were easy, maintaining relationships that didn't challenge him, choosing the path that required the least risk. But now he was actively seeking out discomfort, learning to find strength in situations that would have broken him 6 months earlier. He started taking cold showers, not because he enjoyed them, but because he wanted to practice staying calm when his body was screaming at him to quit. He began doing workouts that left him exhausted and shaking, because he wanted to learn what lay beyond the point where he thought he couldn't continue. Most importantly, he started failing at things on purpose, learning that failure was just information, not a judgment on his worth as a person. 3 months into his training regimen, Marcus ran into Sarah at a coffee shop near their old apartment. She was in town for work, she explained, meeting with clients who were expanding their East Coast operations. She looked amazing, confident, successful, glowing with the satisfaction of someone who had bet on herself and won. "You look different," she said, studying his transformed physique with surprise. "Really different. Have you been working out?" Marcus explained about his decision to join the Navy, about SEAL training, about the complete upheaval of everything he thought he wanted from life. Sarah listened with growing amazement, occasionally shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This is so unlike you," she said finally. "The Marcus I knew wouldn't even go camping because he didn't like sleeping on the ground. And now you want to become some kind of super soldier?" "Maybe the Marcus you knew wasn't really me," Marcus replied. "Maybe he was just who I thought I was supposed to be." They talked for another hour, catching up on the months since their breakup. Sarah's new job was everything she had hoped it would be. She was leading campaigns for major brands, had gotten 2 promotions already, was being considered for a position that would put her in charge of the entire West Coast operation. She had also started dating someone, a film producer who shared her ambition and her love of taking risks. "I'm happy for you," Marcus said, and he meant it. "You made the right choice for you." "Are you happy for yourself?" Sarah asked. "Really? Because this seems like such a drastic change." "I'm worried you're doing this for the wrong reasons." Marcus considered the question seriously. Was he joining the Navy to prove something to Sarah? To show her that he could be the kind of man who took risks and chased dreams? Or was this about something deeper, something that had nothing to do with their relationship? "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Every day, I wake up and think about how I could just change my mind, go back to looking for programming jobs, pretend this never happened. But I'm also more excited about my life than I've been in years. For the first time, I'm doing something that matters to me, not something that's expected of me." Sarah nodded slowly. "I can see it in your eyes. You look like you're actually living instead of just existing." She paused, then reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. I'm sorry it took losing everything for you to find this, but I'm proud of you for finding it." They parted ways outside the coffee shop, and Marcus knew it would probably be the last time they saw each other. She belonged to his old life, the life of comfort and compromise and careful planning. He was walking towards something entirely different. The final month before shipping out to boot camp was the hardest yet. Marcus pushed his training to new levels, running longer distances, lifting heavier weights, practicing the swimming techniques he would need for BUD/S. He also began the mental preparation that would be just as important as physical fitness. He practiced staying calm under stress by putting himself in deliberately uncomfortable situations. He would sit in ice baths until his body was shaking uncontrollably, then practice breathing techniques and positive self-talk until he could regain control. He would do workouts until he was completely exhausted, then do additional exercises when every part of him wanted to quit. Most importantly, he began to change his relationship with failure and discomfort. Instead of seeing them as things to be avoided, he started viewing them as teachers. Each time he failed at something, he analyzed what went wrong and how he could do better next time. Each time he pushed through discomfort, he proved to himself that his limits were more flexible than he had ever imagined. 2 weeks before his departure, Marcus visited his childhood home one last time. His parents had prepared his favorite meal, and they sat around the dining room table where he had done homework as a child, where they had celebrated birthdays and holidays, where they had planned his college education and talked about his future. "Are you scared?" his mother asked. Terrified, Marcus admitted. But also excited. "I feel like I'm finally going after something that's worth being afraid of." His father pulled out a small wrapped package and handed it across the table. Inside was a compass, brass and beautifully crafted, with an inscription on the back, "For finding your true north. Love, Mom and Dad." "We don't understand why you need to do this," his father said. "But we understand that you need to do it. We're proud of you for having the courage to follow your own path, even when it's not the path we would have chosen." Marcus's last night as a civilian was spent alone in his apartment, now empty except for a few essential items and the memories of the life he was leaving behind. He had given away most of his possessions, sold his car, terminated his lease. Everything he owned now fit into 2 duffel bags and a backpack. He stood at the window where he had stood the day he got laid off, looking out at the same view that had seemed so overwhelming 4 months ago. The city looked different now, not like a place where he had failed, but like a place where he had learned something important about himself. Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. 4 months ago, he had been a man whose life had been completely derailed by circumstances beyond his control. Tonight, he was a man who had chosen his own destiny, who had decided that instead of being a victim of change, he would become an agent of his own transformation. He didn't know if he would make it through SEAL training. The statistics were against him, most candidates didn't complete the program. He might find himself washing out in the first week, discovering that he had overestimated his mental toughness or physical capabilities. But even if he failed, even if he spent the next 6 years as a regular sailor on a Navy ship, he would know that he had tried. He would know that when life pushed him off a cliff, he had chosen to jump rather than fall. The alarm was set for 0400 hours. In 8 hours, Marcus would be on a bus to the airport, beginning a journey that would either forge him into one of the world's most elite warriors or break him completely. As he lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the city outside his window, Marcus felt a peace he had never experienced before. For 28 years, he had lived his life according to other people's definitions of success and failure. He had chosen safety over challenge, comfort over growth, the known over the unknown. Tomorrow, all of that would change. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of finding out who Marcus Chen really was when everything comfortable and familiar was stripped away. He closed his eyes and practiced the breathing techniques he had learned, slowing his heart rate, calming his mind, preparing for the first day of a completely different kind of life. In a few hours, he would no longer be a failed software engineer or a man whose fiancée had left him for someone more ambitious. He would be a Navy recruit, starting the long journey toward becoming something he had never imagined possible. The last thing Marcus saw before falling asleep was the compass on his nightstand, its brass surface reflecting the street light from outside. True north. After years of drifting without direction, he finally had a heading. Where it would lead him, he didn't know. But, for the first time in his life, he was ready to find out. The bus that carried Marcus to the airport was filled with young men and women from all over the country, each carrying their own story of what had brought them to this moment. Some were fresh out of high school, 18 years old and looking like they were heading off to summer camp. Others were older, like Marcus, having made the decision to completely change their lives. All of them shared the same nervous energy, the same mixture of excitement and terror that comes with stepping into the unknown. Marcus kept to himself during the flight to Chicago, then San Diego, reading a book about military history and trying not to think about what the next 8 weeks would hold. Basic training wasn't SEAL training, but it would be his first real test of whether he could handle military life. If he couldn't make it through boot camp, he would never even get the chance to try for BUD/S. Naval Station Great Lakes looked exactly like what Marcus had imagined a military base would look like: long, low buildings painted in institutional colors, perfectly maintained grounds, and an atmosphere of serious purpose that was evident from the moment the recruits stepped off the bus. The first thing that struck him was the noise level. Petty officers were shouting instructions, recruits were responding with "yes sir" and "no sir," and everything seemed to happen at double speed. "Welcome to the Navy," shouted Chief Petty Officer Williams, a man who looked like he had been carved from granite and had never smiled in his life. "For the next 8 weeks, your life belongs to me. You will do what I tell you to do, when I tell you to do it, how I tell you to do it. If you have a problem with that, there's a bus leaving for civilian life every day at 1,400 hours. Marcus had read about military training, had watched movies and documentaries, but nothing had prepared him for the complete shock of having his individual identity stripped away in a matter of hours. His head was shaved, his civilian clothes were packed away, and he was issued uniforms that made him look exactly like every other recruit. Within 6 hours of arriving at Great Lakes, Marcus Chen, the software engineer, had ceased to exist, replaced by Seaman Recruit Chen, service number 482-67-8934. The physical demands of boot camp were challenging but manageable, thanks to the months of preparation Marcus had put in. He could handle the morning runs, the calisthenics, the obstacle courses. What surprised him was how difficult the mental adjustment was. Everything in civilian life had been about individual achievement, personal comfort, making choices based on his own preferences. Military life was about being part of a unit, subordinating personal desires to group needs, following orders without question or hesitation. His bunkmate was a kid from Alabama named Jackson who had enlisted straight out of high school. Jackson was everything Marcus wasn't: outgoing, confident, natural athlete, comfortable with the military structure from day one. But Marcus noticed that Jackson struggled with the academic aspects of training, had trouble memorizing the Navy regulations and technical information that came easily to Marcus's trained mind. "You're smart," Jackson said one night as they studied Navy history in their racks. "Like, really smart. How come you didn't go to college instead of joining the Navy?" Marcus explained about his college degree, his career in technology, the circumstances that had brought him to the military. Jackson listened with growing amazement. "Man, you gave up everything to be here. That's either really brave or really crazy." "Probably both," Marcus admitted. As the weeks progressed, Marcus found his rhythm in military life. The structured schedule was actually comforting after months of unemployment and uncertainty. He knew exactly what was expected of him every hour of every day. There was no ambiguity, no wondering if he was making the right choices, no complex decisions about career moves or relationships. There was only the next task, the next formation, the next challenge to overcome. But it was during the 4th week of boot camp that Marcus got his first real taste of what SEAL training would be like. The recruits were participating in a water survival exercise, being dropped into a deep pool wearing full uniforms and expected to tread water for extended periods. Most of the recruits managed the basic requirements without too much trouble, but the instructors kept adding complications: treading water with hands behind their heads, swimming underwater for increasing distances, floating motionless for minutes at a time. Marcus was a decent swimmer, but he had never been tested like this. As the exercise went on, he could feel panic starting to build in his chest. The water was cold, his uniform was heavy and waterlogged, and his body was beginning to rebel against the demands being placed on it. This was just a taste of what BUD/S would be like, and he was already struggling. "Chen," shouted one of the instructors from the pool deck. "You look like you're having trouble down there. You want to quit?" The word quit hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was exactly the moment he had been preparing for, the moment when everything in his body and mind would tell him to give up, when continuing would hurt more than stopping. This wasn't even real SEAL training, just basic water survival, and already he was being tested. Marcus forced himself to slow his breathing, to relax his muscles, to find the calm center he had been practicing for months. The panic was just a signal from his brain, not reality. He was not actually drowning. He was not actually in danger. He was just uncomfortable, and discomfort was not his enemy anymore. "No, sir. Marcus shouted back. I'm good. He stayed in the water for another 20 minutes, long after several other recruits had been pulled out due to exhaustion or panic. When the exercise finally ended, Marcus climbed out of the pool feeling like he had passed more than just a swimming test. He had faced the voice in his head that wanted him to quit, and he had told it no. Chief Williams pulled him aside after the exercise. Chen, I've been watching you. You're not the strongest recruit, not the fastest, not the most naturally athletic. But you've got something else. You don't give up. That's the most important quality a sailor can have, especially if you're serious about special operations. Thank you, Chief. Don't thank me yet, Williams said with something that might have been a smile. Thank me if you make it through BUD/S. That's where they separate the men from the boys. Boot camp graduation was a surreal experience for Marcus. 8 weeks earlier, he had been a civilian with no understanding of military culture or capabilities. Now he was a sailor, someone who belonged to an institution that had been serving the country for over 2 centuries. His parents came to the ceremony, and Marcus could see the pride in their eyes even as they struggled to recognize their son in his navy dress uniform. You look different, his mother said, studying his face. Older. More serious. Marcus felt different too. The physical changes were obvious. He was leaner, stronger, carried himself with the confident posture of someone who had been through shared hardship with his fellow recruits. But the mental changes ran deeper. He had proven to himself that he could function in an environment where individual comfort meant nothing, where the group mission was everything, where quitting was not an option. After boot camp came advanced individual training, where Marcus learned the technical skills he would need as a Navy operations specialist. The work was interesting and challenging, involving radar systems, communications equipment, and tactical coordination. But Marcus's mind was already focused on what came next: Naval Special Warfare Preparatory School, the 8-week program that would prepare candidates for BUD/S training. NSW Prep School was held at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado in San Diego, the same base where BUD/S training took place. For the first time since enlisting, Marcus was surrounded by other sailors who shared his goal of becoming SEALs. The energy was different here, more intense, more focused. Everyone understood that this was the last stop before the real test began. The school was designed to prepare candidates for the physical and mental demands of BUD/S. The days were filled with swimming, running, calisthenics, and ocean training. But, more than that, it was an introduction to the SEAL mentality, the idea that conventional limits were just suggestions, that ordinary humans could do extraordinary things if they were willing to pay the price. Marcus's instructor was Senior Chief Petty Officer Anderson, a SEAL veteran with 20 years of experience who had been through multiple combat deployments. Anderson had the kind of quiet authority that came from having been tested in situations where failure meant death, and his presence commanded instant respect from every candidate in the program. Gentlemen, Anderson said during their first class, over the next 8 weeks, we're going to teach you what you need to know to survive BUD/S training. But, I want to be clear about something: we can't make you tough enough to graduate. That has to come from inside you. What we can do is show you what's possible when you refuse to accept the word impossible. The physical training at NSW Prep was the hardest thing Marcus had ever experienced. The runs were longer and faster than anything he had done in boot camp. The swimming sessions pushed him beyond what he thought his body could handle. The calisthenics sessions left him shaking and exhausted, questioning whether he had what it took to continue. But it was during the mental training sessions that Marcus began to understand what becoming a SEAL really meant. Anderson and the other instructors shared stories from their own training, talked about the moments when they had wanted to quit, when their bodies had failed them, when continuing had seemed impossible. The human body is capable of incredible things, Anderson explained during one session. But the human mind is what determines whether those capabilities are ever used. In BUD/S, you're going to face situations where your body is telling you to quit, where your mind is screaming that you can't continue, where everything logical suggests that stopping is the only reasonable choice. The men who become SEALs are the ones who find something beyond logic, beyond comfort, beyond self-preservation. Marcus thought about his old life, about the comfort and safety he had given up to be here. In his previous world, the idea of voluntarily putting himself through extreme discomfort would have seemed insane. But now he was beginning to understand that comfort was not just overrated, it was actually dangerous. Comfort made people soft, made them accept less than they were capable of, made them quit when things got difficult. The ocean training was where Marcus faced his deepest fears. Growing up in Virginia, he had never spent much time in the ocean, and the Pacific waters off San Diego were cold, rough, and unforgiving. The candidates were required to complete increasingly difficult swimming exercises, often in conditions that seemed designed to break their spirit. During one particularly challenging session, the instructors had the candidates swimming in heavy surf while wearing full uniforms and boots. The waves were 6 to 8 feet, the water temperature was in the low 60s, and the current was strong enough to pull even strong swimmers off course. Marcus found himself struggling just to stay afloat, let alone complete the required distance. Halfway through the swim, Marcus felt his body beginning to shut down. His muscles were cramping from the cold water, his lungs were burning from the effort, and panic was starting to cloud his thinking. This was exactly the kind of situation where people drowned, where the difference between training and real danger became irrelevant. But, instead of panic, Marcus felt something else taking over, a cold, calm determination that surprised him with its intensity. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the test of whether all his mental training had actually worked. He forced himself to relax, to focus on smooth, efficient strokes, to ignore the voice in his head that was screaming at him to head for shore. He completed the swim, one of only 12 candidates out of 30 who finished the exercise without assistance. As he climbed out of the water, shaking and exhausted, Senior Chief Anderson was waiting for him. "How do you feel, Chen?" "Cold, tired, and ready for the next challenge, Senior Chief." Anderson nodded approvingly. "Good answer. Because this was just a warm-up for what's coming." The final week of NSW prep included a preview of Hell Week, the legendary 5.5-day ordeal that was the centerpiece of BUD/S first phase. The instructors put the candidates through a compressed version of the experience, 36 hours of continuous training with minimal sleep, cold water exposure, physical challenges that pushed everyone to their breaking point. Marcus discovered that he was better at handling sleep deprivation than most of the other candidates. His years as a programmer, staying up all night to meet deadlines, had given him practice at functioning when exhausted. But the physical demands were unlike anything he had ever experienced. Carrying heavy boats over his head for miles, doing calisthenics in the surf zone while waves crashed over him, crawling through sand and mud while instructors shouted and criticized, it was like something designed to break human beings rather than train them. But that was exactly the point. As Senior Chief Anderson explained, SEAL training wasn't about teaching specific skills, those could be learned later. It was about finding men who simply would not quit, no matter what was done to them, no matter how much they wanted to stop, no matter how logical quitting seemed. During the worst moment of the Hell Week preview, Marcus found himself face down in the surf at 2 a.m, so cold and tired that he couldn't feel his hands or feet. The instructors were yelling, his teammates were struggling, and everything in his body was telling him that this was insane, that no rational person would continue to put themselves through this kind of punishment. But, as he lay there in the sand with waves washing over him, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. 6 months ago, he had been a man with no purpose, no direction, no understanding of what he was capable of. Now he was discovering that his limits were far beyond anything he had ever imagined. He got up, helped his teammates with their boat, and continued with the exercise. Not because it was easy, not because he enjoyed it, but because this was who he was becoming, someone who finished what he started, regardless of the cost. NSW prep graduation was a smaller, more intimate ceremony than boot camp had been. Only 18 of the original 30 candidates completed the program. The rest had been dropped for various reasons: injury, inability to meet the physical standards, or simply deciding that SEAL training was not for them. Marcus stood with his fellow graduates, all of them lean, hardened, and marked by their shared experience of discovering what they were made of. In 2 weeks, they would report to BUD/S training, where the real test would begin. The statistics were brutal: most of them would not make it through the program. But, standing there in his dress uniform, Marcus felt ready for whatever was coming. Senior Chief Anderson addressed the graduates before the ceremony ended. Gentlemen, you've completed the preparatory phase of your SEAL journey. You've proven that you can handle discomfort, that you can function when tired, that you can work as part of a team under pressure. But, I want you to understand something clearly: what you've experienced over the past 8 weeks is nothing compared to what's waiting for you at BUD/S. He paused, studying each of their faces. Some of you are thinking that you've already proven you have what it takes. You're wrong. Others are thinking that maybe you've gotten in over your heads. You're probably wrong too. The truth is, none of us knows who's going to make it through until you're actually in the middle of it. What I can tell you is this: the men who graduate from BUD/S are not necessarily the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. They're the ones who simply refuse to quit. After the ceremony, Marcus called his parents to tell them about completing NSW prep. They were proud but worried, understanding that he was about to enter the most challenging phase of his military training. "Are you sure this is what you want?" his mother asked. "It's not too late to change your mind, to choose something less dangerous." Marcus looked out at the Pacific Ocean, where he had learned so much about himself over the past 8 weeks. The water was rough today, with whitecaps visible all the way to the horizon. In 2 weeks, he would be back in that ocean, but the stakes would be much higher. "I'm sure, Mom. For the first time in my life, I'm completely sure about what I'm doing." That night, lying in his rack at the base, Marcus thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. 8 months ago, he had been a man whose biggest challenge was debugging software code. Now he was preparing to attempt one of the most difficult training programs in the world, something that would test every aspect of his physical and mental capabilities. He thought about Sarah, probably sleeping comfortably in her apartment in Los Angeles, building the successful career she had always wanted. He thought about his former colleagues at TechFlow, most of whom had probably found new jobs by now, returning to the safe, predictable world of corporate technology. He thought about the man he had been just 8 months ago, someone who had never tested his limits, never pushed beyond his comfort zone, never discovered what he was truly capable of. Tomorrow would be his last day of relative comfort for a very long time. In 2 weeks, BUD/S training would begin, and Marcus would find out whether the transformation he had undergone over the past 8 months was real or just preparation for an even greater transformation to come. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus felt the familiar mixture of fear and excitement that had become his constant companion since walking into that recruitment office. He was afraid of failing, afraid of discovering that he wasn't strong enough or tough enough or mentally resilient enough to complete SEAL training. But he was even more afraid of not trying, of spending the rest of his life wondering what he might have been capable of if he had just been willing to find out. The ocean was calling, and Marcus Chen was ready to answer. The first day of BUD/S Class 342 began at 0500 hours with a formation on the beach at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Marcus stood with 147 other candidates, all of them wearing the same olive drab uniforms, all of them carrying the same mixture of excitement and terror that had kept most of them awake the night before. Looking around at his classmates, Marcus saw former college athletes, prior service Marines and Army Rangers, police officers, firefighters, and men from every conceivable background who had decided that they needed to test themselves against the ultimate challenge. The sun was just beginning to rise over San Diego, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. But, as Instructor Chief Petty Officer Martinez stepped in front of the formation, the beauty of the morning was forgotten. Martinez was a legend at BUD/S, a 20-year SEAL veteran who had been through multiple combat deployments and had trained thousands of candidates over his career as an instructor. "Welcome to BUD/S, Martinez said, his voice carrying easily across the formation without seeming to raise it. "Look around at the men standing next to you. Statistically, most of you will not be here in 6 months. Some of you will quit today. Some will quit this week. Some will make it all the way to Hell Weekend, discover that they don't have what it takes when things get really hard." He paused, studying their faces with the detached interest of someone who had seen this scene play out hundreds of times before. "But some of you, a very few of you, will discover that you're capable of more than you ever imagined. You'll find out that the human body and mind can endure things that seem impossible, that ordinary men can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept the word quit." Marcus felt his heart pounding as Martinez continued. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. All the preparation, all the training, all the mental conditioning came down to this, proving that he belonged among the few who would earn the right to call themselves Navy SEALs. The next 24 weeks are going to test every aspect of your character, Martinez said. We're going to push you beyond what you think is possible. We're going to find your breaking point, and then, we're going to push you past it. Some of you think you know what you're made of. You're about to find out if you're right. The brass bell that Marcus had read about stood mounted on a post near the instructor's platform, gleaming in the early morning sun. It looked deceptively simple, just a brass bell with a rope hanging from it. But Marcus knew that bell represented the difference between the life he was trying to build and the life he was leaving behind. Ring it 3 times, and his SEAL dream would be over. Keep it silent, and continue toward becoming something he had never thought possible. First phase of BUD/S was 8 weeks of pure physical and mental conditioning, designed to weed out candidates who couldn't handle the basic demands of SEAL training. The days began before dawn with calisthenics on the beach, hundreds of push-ups, sit-ups, and jumping jacks performed in the sand while waves crashed nearby. Then came the runs, starting at 4 miles and gradually building to longer distances, always at a pace that pushed everyone to their limits. But it was the pool training that separated the swimmers from everyone else. Marcus had always been a decent swimmer, but BUD/S pool training was unlike anything he had experienced. The candidates were required to perform complex underwater exercises while holding their breath for extended periods, sometimes while instructors actively tried to disorient them or interfere with their equipment. During the second week, Marcus faced his first real crisis. The exercise was called drown-proofing. Candidates had their hands tied behind their backs and their feet bound, then were expected to survive in a deep pool for 20 minutes. The technique involved bobbing to the bottom of the pool, pushing off to surface for air, then sinking back down in a controlled rhythm. Marcus had practiced this exercise at NSW prep, but the real thing was far more challenging. The pool seemed deeper, the water colder, and his body felt heavier with his limbs bound. Halfway through the exercise, panic began to creep into his mind. What if he couldn't surface in time? What if he lost the rhythm and inhaled water? What if this was where his SEAL dream ended? But then, Marcus remembered something Senior Chief Anderson had taught him during NSW prep: fear is just information. It's your brain trying to keep you alive by avoiding risk. But courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and functioning anyway. Marcus forced himself to slow down, to focus on the technique rather than the fear, to trust his training rather than his emotions. He completed the exercise, surfacing after 20 minutes exhausted but successful. As he climbed out of the pool, he saw that 3 other candidates had failed the exercise and were being evaluated for possible removal from the program. The runs at BUD/S were legendary for their brutality. The soft sand of the beach made every step more difficult, and the instructors set a pace that ensured most candidates were running at the edge of their cardiovascular limits. Marcus discovered that his months of preparation had served him well. He was able to keep up with the required times, even as other candidates began to fall behind. But it was during the 3rd week that Marcus encountered his first teammate quitting. Johnson was a former college football player from Texas, built like a truck and seemingly indestructible. He had been one of the strongest performers in the class, leading many of the physical evolutions and encouraging his teammates when things got tough. During a particularly brutal afternoon of log PT exercises performed while carrying heavy wooden logs as a team, Johnson suddenly stopped in the middle of an evolution, walked over to the brass bell, and rang it 3 times. The sound echoed across the training area, and everyone stopped what they were doing to watch. Johnson walked over to Instructor Martinez, saluted, and said simply, "I quit, instructor." Marcus watched in shock as Johnson gathered his gear and walked away from the training area. Just like that, one of their strongest teammates was gone. No dramatic exit, no long explanation, just the sudden realization that even someone who seemed unstoppable could decide they had had enough. That evening, Marcus called his father for the first time since starting BUD/S. He was allowed only a brief phone call, and he was exhausted, but he needed to hear a familiar voice. "How are you holding up?" his father asked. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done," Marcus admitted. "Every day, I think about quitting. Every day, something inside me wants to just stop and go back to regular Navy life. But you don't quit. No. I don't quit. But I'm starting to understand why so many people do. It's not that they're weak or cowards. It's that this pushes you so far beyond normal human limits that continuing stops making logical sense. His father was quiet for a moment. Your mother and I have been talking about your journey. We didn't understand it at first, why you would give up a comfortable life to put yourself through this. But we're beginning to see that this isn't about becoming a soldier. This is about becoming the man you were meant to be. The fourth week brought the introduction of boats, heavy inflatable craft that teams of 6 candidates were required to carry everywhere they went. The boat became both a physical burden and a symbol of teamwork. If one member of the boat crew wasn't pulling his weight, everyone suffered. If the crew worked together efficiently, they could handle challenges that would be impossible for individuals. Marcus was assigned to Boat Crew 4 with 5 other candidates: Rodriguez, a former police officer from Chicago; Williams, a college graduate from Georgia who had been a competitive swimmer; Thompson, an ex-Marine from California; Davis, a firefighter from New York; and Peterson, a farm kid from Iowa who was quiet but incredibly tough. The 6 of them would become closer than brothers over the coming weeks, sharing every hardship and every small victory. Their first major test as a boat crew came during a timed run from the base to the Hotel del Coronado and back, approximately 4 miles, with a 200-pound rubber boat carried over their heads. The time standard was ambitious, and boat crews that failed to meet it would face additional punishment in the form of extra physical training. Marcus and his crew started strong, finding a rhythm that allowed them to move the boat efficiently while maintaining the required pace. But after 2 miles, fatigue began to set in. The boat felt heavier with each step, their shoulders were raw from the straps, and the pace that had seemed manageable at the start was now pushing all of them to their limits. "We're falling behind," Rodriguez gasped as they passed the halfway point. "No talking," shouted Instructor Petty Officer Clark, who was running alongside them. "Save your breath for running." Marcus could feel his team starting to break down. Peterson was stumbling, Williams was breathing hard, and even Thompson, the ex-Marine, was showing signs of fatigue. This was exactly the kind of moment that separated the boat crews that made it from those that didn't, when everything hurt, when continuing seemed impossible, when quitting would actually be the logical choice. "Stay strong," Marcus said quietly, just loud enough for his crew to hear. "We've got this." 4 more miles, then we're done. They didn't make the time standard. They finished the run 3 minutes over the required pace, which meant extra physical training for the entire crew. But, as they stood in formation afterward, exhausted and sore, Marcus realized something important had happened. His boat crew had stayed together, had finished as a team, and had proven they could push through adversity without anyone quitting. The 5th week brought night training evolutions performed in complete darkness that tested the candidates' ability to function when they couldn't see what they were doing. Swimming in the ocean at midnight, navigating obstacle courses with no lights, performing complex team exercises by touch and sound alone. Marcus discovered that he was good at this kind of training, that his analytical mind helped him break down complex challenges into manageable components even when he couldn't see what he was doing. But it was during the 6th week that Marcus faced his darkest moment in first phase. The evolution was surf passage, taking their rubber boat through the heavy surf of the Pacific Ocean, an exercise that tested both seamanship skills and the ability to function as a team in dangerous conditions. The waves that day were 8 to 10 feet, larger than anything they had trained in before, and the water temperature was cold enough to cause hypothermia in a matter of minutes. Marcus's boat crew was third in line to attempt the passage. They watched as the first crew successfully navigated through the breakers, their boat riding up and over the massive waves like a cork. The second crew wasn't so fortunate, their boat flipped in the surf zone, dumping all 6 candidates into the churning water. The instructors quickly pulled them to safety, but Marcus could see the fear in their eyes as they were helped onto the beach. "Boat Crew 4, you're up," called Instructor Clark. Marcus and his teammates carried their boat to the water's edge, studying the wave patterns and timing their entry. The key was hitting the waves at exactly the right angle, with enough speed to punch through but not so much that they lost control. "On my count," Rodriguez said, taking his position at the bow. 1, 2, 3. They ran the boat into the water and jumped aboard just as a massive wave approached. Marcus felt the boat rise up the face of the wave, climbing what seemed like a wall of water. Then, suddenly, they were airborne, flying over the crest and crashing down the backside. The next wave was even larger. Marcus could see it approaching like a green mountain, building higher and higher as it moved toward shore. Their boat hit it at exactly the wrong angle, and, suddenly, they were tumbling through the water, the boat flipping end over end while Marcus was tossed around like a rag doll. He surfaced gasping, the cold water shocking his system and momentarily disorienting him. Where was the boat? Where were his teammates? The current was strong, pulling him parallel to the shore, and another wave was approaching fast. For a moment, Marcus felt real panic, not training panic, but actual fear for his safety. Then, his training kicked in. He relaxed his body, let the current carry him rather than fighting it, and swam toward shore with strong, efficient strokes. He made it to the beach just as his teammates were emerging from the water, all of them cold and exhausted but unhurt. The boat had washed up 50 yards down the beach, battered but intact. "You okay, Chen?" Williams asked, helping him to his feet. Marcus nodded, though he was shaking from both cold and adrenaline. "Yeah, I'm good." Instructor Clark appeared beside them. "That was ugly, boat crew 4. You want to try again, or are you done for the day?" The question was a test, Marcus realized. They could take the safe option, head back to the warmth of the classroom, and try surf passage again another day. Or they could get back in the water immediately, while they were still cold and scared, and prove that one failure wouldn't stop them. Marcus looked at his teammates and saw his own determination reflected in their faces. "We're ready to go again, instructor." They carried the boat back to the water's edge and made a second attempt. This time, they read the waves correctly, timed their approach perfectly, and punched through the surf zone into the calmer water beyond. As they paddled back toward shore, riding the waves instead of fighting them, Marcus felt something click into place in his mind. He had faced a moment of real danger, had felt genuine fear, and had chosen to continue anyway. The 7th week brought the first major attrition event of first phase, a comprehensive physical fitness test that would determine which candidates were ready to continue to Hell Week. The standards were brutal: minimum of 50 push-ups in 2 minutes, 50 sit-ups in 2 minutes, 10 pull-ups with no time limit, and a 4-mile timed run in 32 minutes or less, followed by a 1,000-meter swim in 22 minutes or less. Marcus had been preparing for this test since his first day of training, but, as he stood on the beach with the other candidates, he felt the familiar mixture of confidence and terror. He knew he was physically ready, but this test represented more than just fitness. It was the gateway to Hell Week, the legendary ordeal that had broken thousands of hopeful candidates. The push-ups went well. Marcus completed 65 repetitions, well above the minimum standard. The sit-ups were harder, his abdominal muscles were still sore from the previous day's training, but he managed 58 repetitions. The pull-ups were his strongest event, and he completed 18 without strain. Then came the run. 4 miles on the soft sand of the beach, at a pace that would require him to average 8 minutes per mile. Marcus started conservatively, running with a group that included Rodriguez and Williams, settling into a rhythm that felt sustainable. But, as they passed the 2-mile mark, Marcus realized he was falling behind the pace he needed. The 3rd mile was agony. Marcus could feel his legs getting heavy, his lungs burning, his pace slowing despite his best efforts. Other candidates were passing him, and he could hear Instructor Martinez running alongside, calling out split times that confirm.